Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, The Real ROI of Network Visibility. Today, you'll hear from Andre Kindness of Forrester Research and Keith Bromley, a Product Marketing Manager here at Ixia. Before we begin, we wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. We will try to answer these during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. We do capture all questions. After the webinar, you will receive an email with links to today's slide deck and Ixia's white paper, Realizing ROI from Your Network Visibility Investment. You can expand your slide area by clicking on the Maximize icon on the top right of the slide area or by dragging the bottom right corner of your slide area. Also, if you have any technical difficulty at all, please click the Help widget. It has a question mark icon and covers common technical questions. Additionally, an on-demand version of the webcast will be available approximately one day after the webcast, so tomorrow, and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. So today, as I said, this is the Real ROI for Network Visibility webcast. We'll be covering several things. Andre will be going over an overview of the network visibility market as well as addressing executive questions regarding the need for visibility, in addition to quantifying ROI and how to properly use it. And then Keith will take over and talk about sources of ROI and the cost of doing nothing. So thanks again for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Andre.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy schedules to hear Forrester's latest research. And I'd like to thank Ixia for putting this webinar together because, here it is. Enterprises really aren't for a significant change of what's going on with the infrastructure, and specifically the inflection point that's happening with networking. And what I mean by this is the fact that, we can't look at network as discrete components. And that being said is we can't tackle, the network as that and monitoring as kind of this, fixed of any situation or ill within it. Let me put it this way. With the fluidity of data and applications within a data center, between data centers or even hybrid clouds, it makes it hard to define what exactly the network is and trying to throw, a monitoring solution at one specific point. Let alone connecting mobile users to a location of an app, data is no longer at the hub and spoke system, but it's really a mesh of virtual links and connections all over the place, much like what you see in the screen in front of you. Consequently, this means to optimize the infrastructure and the user experience. We can't take monitoring as an afterthought, and we can't just throw it in one spot or another, or just throw span ports up or tap links, or just do things ad hoc, willy-nilly all over the place. And so this is what I wanted to spend the next 20 minutes or so with you, kind of talk to you and share with you what we're seeing from the overall market, the market itself of visibility, of monitoring, and what's going on there. And then I want to kind of take you down the path of what questions are coming in from me, both from a business perspective, from executive teams, as well as from a technology perspective. And then really how to answer those questions and what we're starting to see in that area. And then take you through quantifying the ROI of monitoring and really how to prepare for that environment itself. So let's just start off and look at what's happening with the overall monitoring market itself. And I have one word, explosion. Let me just let it sink in for a second. It is exploding all over the place, and I don't care if we're talking about application performance monitoring, network management monitoring, or network monitoring, voice monitoring, business monitoring, big data, it's all over the place. Besides the business getting hyper-focused on customers' information and big data, every IT team has a new focus on providing better service. I don't care from the server team, the storage team, the data center, all the way out to the mobile or app teams themselves. End-user monitoring, application performance monitoring are new areas. But don't let this overshadow the fact that traditional monitorings are being bought by many teams, almost every team out there. I do network assessments, and I engage in other teams to find out, how the network can provide better services. And I don't care if I'm talking to the server team or the storage team or the VoIP team. They each have their own network monitoring as well. So, as a whole, monitoring is becoming such a critical item within infrastructure operations and specifically within the business itself. And so this is why I get a ton of calls from the the VoIP or the app team, the storage team, all looking to to do monitoring and wanting to do it better, because knowledge is power and people are hungry for information in itself. And this is why you see in the screen in front of you, over year, we've almost doubled the increase in growth in people implementing or expanding monitoring, or actually even planning to implement monitoring itself in areas that they haven't done before. And the reality is that the fact is, historically, monitoring has been always an afterthought. It has not, acquired much of a budget within infrastructure and operations. But that's, in the last year or so, that's been a huge change within what's occurring within the enterprise team. And this kind of leads me over to the fact is that, so why, why is this happening? And so a lot of it really can come from the fact is the questions I'm getting from, technology professionals as well as executives or business professionals. And here's what I'm getting calls about. Basically, they fall really into two camps, like I said, a technology one or a business section. One team typically looks for a solution that's to solve a problem because of so much that's starting to happen, and the criticality of applications and services to the business itself. And the fact is, if anything goes wrong, they want to solve it. At the same time, I really have an executive team calling me and wanting to justify that investment, where they need to put it, how they can make organizations work together. Is there information or monitoring that enables that to happen? And I get executive teams thinking about SLAs, and so this drives this type of monitoring type of questions in there. And I'm not going to answer right now, but what I want to do is start off on the technology side and answer these questions of how how to address them, or how I address it with the audiences out there. And I'm going to start off with the technology questions. And I'll start with the old Indian story about an elephant and blind man. I'm sure you know it, and I'll need to dive into the actual story itself. But I bring it up because of the world I live in. Like I said, most of the calls I get from clients are trying to solve a specific issue. And typically, at the beginning of the call, they come to the call itself with a problem, kind of like a blind man touching an elephant. And I'll hear something about WAN links, or I'll hear something about virtual machines and resetting the network itself, and having the network adjust. But then I'll ask into the questions itself. So we think about WAN and throwing out a WAN optimizer. But is that the best thing for that organization itself? And the reason I ask that is because it might not help if the issue is not around particular type of traffic in itself. And so then I start to ask us, what kind of traffic is starting to cross that WAN link? And typically, I don't have a good answer, and it usually falls back to the thoughts of, oh, it's internet traffic. When in reality, after we go in and we start to dig into it, and I ask for some of the logs to be pulled on that WAN link, we find out it's not internet, and it's actually another application that's causing most of the congestion on the link itself. And so to be able to really start to solve a problem, you have to understand what's happening within the infrastructure itself, and specifically what's occurring across the network and specifically across links. And so the industry, trying to solve a problem and throwing a point solution doesn't really work. When we start to think about what's actually starting to occur in the world around us today, and take a look at the screen in front of you. The fact is that we have a user, we have an employee doing a mashup of applications and services, interweaving personal and work life together across multiple devices, across multiple locations. They're grabbing things all over the place to solve their business problems. And so when you get technology questions of, what do I need to monitor? I have X problem, what should we buy? Or the fact is, where's the best place to monitor? The WAN, link, the data center, or wireless? Or should I just monitor the application or the user experience? The answer is yes. If you look in front of you, the answer is yes. Discrete issues within the virtualization, cloud and mobility, data users and applications, and constant flux and mobility, there's no such thing as being able to say, hey, this is the only thing you need to monitor, or this is the only link you're going to have to monitor itself. The reality is that you have a very meshed set of services out there, and that's going to be developed in the network. And so to support this new environment really requires a network service to spread everywhere. The fabrics and service chain you see here in the data center is spreading out outside of DC. This means technology management is that existing monitoring should work together to provide I&O infrastructure and operations with a system-wide understanding of availability and performance. So answering the questions is this is a critical need because of the rising complexity and the multi-service technology coming together. that affects the end user and being able to, to get their jobs done. And the fact is the adoption point or the domain monitoring tools add to the complexity of technology management. Therefore, it's critical that these infrastructure and operation teams think about monitoring as an integrated tool set and across a single view of the entire system. So really need to have, the fact is that start to create this monitoring of the system, monitoring tools across the entire environment and platform, and create this monitoring architecture out there. And so we start to think about that so you want to have this visibility, but also lends itself to the fact is that this visibility will also start to ignite other aspects of what's occurring inside of infrastructures, and specifically what's happening within the network itself. And so this leads me to the next evolution of the infrastructure, and especially networks. The fabrics and service changes I mentioned before, driving the business to wanting things faster, and really driving the industry to create automated solutions out there, is having network administrators, CLI into switches or manually do packet captures or dig through syslogs is not a sustainable activity in this world of instant gratification of having services on demand. And so this is why we see the industry a buzz about automation. It's amazing and around this forcing function. And so we hear about programmability, we hear about software-defined networking, we hear about network functions virtualized. But the reality is you can't put a lot of new technology in there, and it won't be worth a hill of beans. And the reality is if you're not monitoring. And if you take a look at in front of you that, yes, you have a controller, you have an infrastructure, but the reality is that fundamentally to automation itself is you have to be able to monitor everything to make adjustments. And so this new network infrastructure has to have a platform architecture of visibility across the entire thing. Like I said, you can't automatically redirect flows or orchestrate services without knowing the state of the system at that moment in time. And it's such a critical leg to the future of programming and automation within the infrastructure itself. Let me give you a proof point. Today, 80% of organizations says it takes 2 or more days to make a change in a data center. Now compare this against web services companies that have done a lot more automation who can do the changes within a data center within minutes. And so you think about it, that's 48 man-hours over that 2-day period down to minutes. Multiply that out by the amount of personnel within your data center. And this is the amount of money that it's costing organizations for every single change that's made in the infrastructure when organizations aren't thinking about improving the efficiency or automating. And so then this is the value in the direction of being able to monitor and start to answer some of the questions I get from clients. But also from the business perspective side, the executive teams are calling me are not just thinking about technology. Yes, I talk to directors of technology or talk to CIOs. But trust me, they've got one leg on the business side. And it's not a technology issue specifically within monitoring. We have a new world that's dependent on the business being able to deliver the right product at the right location for their customer. And so you have to, using that concept, you can be able to start to answer some of the questions we heard earlier around the business side. How do I justify my investment monitoring? What tools can help, improve the applications or, business processes? How do I meet my SLAs? Well, and here's the thing, the rapid change of technology innovation and the business interest in digital services to delight customers is increasing the importance of business-centric monitoring approach. Business and IT services within enterprise do not just need to support the business process itself, but here's the reality. You look on the left-hand side, you improve the quality, reliability of the brand itself, improve the customer experience, all being done on monitoring. And ultimately, this means the availability and the performance of a technology-based services is not only important to the IN organization, the infrastructure and operations team, but it's fundamental and it's critical to the competitiveness of the business itself. And so then when you say, you hear the question is, how do I meet my SLAs? You first define it by, what is your SLAs? You're going to have SLAs for each team. The second piece is, to say that you're meeting them is you're going to have to monitor that aspect of whatever is important to that SLA, and that's how you start to meet those SLAs or refine SLAs in particular for the business itself. But here's the thing itself is, and this is what you start to see in front of you, is that really the network is the only place that really touches every part of the business. And so from a business question or from a technology question, the foundational piece to start off is really within the network itself. And for executive teams, here it is. The majority of your applications and technology devices that hook into your organization to support the business processes communicate over IP. Let me reinforce that. Communicate the business, customers, the employees, communicate, information is shared, the reality is over IP. And therefore, monitoring of the network is essential, as issues can not only frustrate your employees or customers, but can also hurt the revenue and be harmful to the overall brand of the business itself. And so throwing bandwidth at the problem is not a solution. What is needed is a very sophisticated monitoring technology that can visualize the network usage and employees' activities and be able to orchestrate that and give information back to the networking team as well as other teams out there to really be able to hone in and fix the service as well as to optimize the services heading to that particular user within the network itself. And so this is why you take a look at Forrester looked across multiple networking technologies out there and application and monitoring technologies. And what we said was that fundamentally that network monitoring, not only based on its heritage and the fact it's been around the longest, it is actually the most mature out there. And also the fact is the network touches every part of the business. Let me reinforce that. People say, well, people use applications. No. Not every part of the business uses the same applications. Here's the reality. In machine-to-machine or Internet of Things, applications aren't being shared across it. Those things are using the network to share data back and forth between the machines itself and the sensors. So the network is the only piece that connects every part of the business together. And so this is why it's such a fundamental part to start within that area. And so to make a proof point around it is, diving into the ROI, so this kind of answers the questions around why, monitoring. What do we need to do with it? Why is it important? Why do I need to build the tools out there? Well, we see it as a very important part. So, to evaluate it and to get your customers to think about it in a more holistic way. And let me prove around why there's such an ROI around the monitoring and the value behind it. And so let's just start off on the quickest aspects and what typically people want to be able to quickly get out of it besides some of the long-term benefits, which I'll go into a little bit. But let's start off with one of the easiest areas. One of the most common metrics for IT operations is mean time to resolution. It's a good metric to gauge an organization's performance at executing incident management and problem solving. Basically, time is money. So less time it takes to resolve the incident and problem can easily translate into the reduction of the operational expenses at some upfront cost to reassign people. Tools are useful, but they're only good as effective as the visibility and clarity you have into the problem itself. And so lacking understanding the process itself causes confusion, contributes to the sloppy execution of solving the problem. And so let me give you this point itself is, with good monitoring, I can see, and what we get back from customers, to find the problem, the mean time to knowledge itself of the problem can be cut by 90%. Think about every incident out there and being able to cut a majority of the time to solving the problem by 90%. 90%. And so that's not just also, the fact is of mean time between resolution, but also being able to ignite automation and workflows in itself. We think about runbook automation and other automation forms such as workload automation. Predefined, extensible framework of specific workflows. Yet these workflows can be triggered by data and by monitoring itself and ensure the improvements of mean time between resolution itself. And I've heard from companies and we've gotten feedback that operational related to getting rid of some of the manual work can cut operational costs by 40% by starting to do some of the automation workflows within the organization. Here's another one that's close to my heart, specifically within a network. And here's the reality. You look at all your links out there and you really look at the utilization on average across all your links and you're in the single digits. Yes, you might have links that are overused, but on average in the single digits, because the reality is, just like with the Ethernet channel, you're sending packets over based in frames based on MAC address or IP address. That's how you're doing the load balancing. In the world where we're thinking about automation or programmability, that to be able to send packets across multiple links based on congestion and based on optimizing out there, you can double you can actually cut your costs in half and double the efficiency. So go from single digit to double digit efficiencies within those links itself by having visibility and be able to send packets not based on the destination or the source, but based on the utilization of those links themselves, and really start to optimize your networking hardware within the infrastructure. And so those are some quick things that you can do today that will help, drive the ROI within, the monitoring tools that you want to go out and purchase. I would also say, if we think of long term, we need to think about this from a business perspective and long term itself. And one of the things is that the drive towards its elastic services. And the fact is that businesses have no patience for IT and are going out and buying SaaS or going out and buying other services, because the reality is business is being pressured by their customers to get what they want when they want it. And so we need to remove, the fact is we need to move a lot of the manual elements out of there. And these manual elements, here's the reality of it, cause a lot of errors and downtime within the organization itself. And so we need to think about, how do you eliminate that? And a lot of that is based on starting to automate this repetitious manual work that we see in there. And so but the only way you can start to do that is going back to the concept of you have to have, in this closed loop system, monitoring to automate and get rid of those manual errors. Proof point in hand. People automating writing prescriptions. So instead of having a piece of paper and it going through a hospital where the doctor writes it and it gets passed on to a desk and it gets passed on to its thing and gets rewritten, that hospitals, and this is automating, is that the doctor writes a bedside prescription, except doesn't write it out, just clicks on a few screens and it shows up at the pharmacy downstairs on the screen itself. You're automating that process. We've seen hospitals slash their costs dramatically by just being able to change and remove the manual element and potentially all the errors that are associated with writing prescriptions. And we have to think of the exact same thing that goes on in infrastructure, so being able to automate. And the reality is, to be able to do that, you have to do the monitoring. And the last thing I want to leave you with is the business aspect too. End user monitoring builds detailed information in relation to the technology based of the end users. So this means that the technology based on interactions are recorded and alerts can be generated based on abnormal activity. The real benefit is enriching the persona knowledge and providing a platform for the analytics to make insights of best how to serve your customers out there. And the way you can see that happening today is in the wireless arena. You're starting to pull, and you start to see now that people are interested in is where are people moving with inside the malls, what's happening with inside stadiums, where people are congregating. And not because you just want to know where they're at for solving incidents, but just like in advertising and sales for TV, you want to know what your audience is watching, and so you see an account exec go out and sell that advertising space. Well, the same thing is happening in real estate within malls and stadiums, that those areas are actually being sold to individual businesses where they're at. What they can do based on knowing based on wireless users moving around and seeing the location of them and where they're aggregating at and where the best spots are, you have real estate personnel for malls and for stadiums and for big areas using that information to sell spots and make some business value out of it. And what is that? That is monitoring using network information and sharing it with the business to allow them to make a difference in the way that the business grows revenue or changes their customer experiences or creates new revenue streams or customer base for the business itself. And so ROI is more than just slashing cost of operations. That is a very quick and fundamental thing. But ROI and the monitoring can change the way that business is done and adds a lot of business value itself. And so as we kind of go back through this and we think about the overall market space itself, which I went over, and the value is that there's a ton of questions being asked about monitoring because it's becoming such an essential part of the business and essential part of the infrastructure operations, solving business problems and providing new services to the business. And so as I went through this, I showed you that there's a ton of ROI. They can do 90% slashing mean time to resolution. You can slash operational costs by 40%. There's a definite ROI that can be quantified to the business itself, and you just have to take a look at each areas and be able to deliver that and understand it and be able to present it to the teams itself or the personnel that needs to in the purchasing decision. And so what I'd like to do is, hand this over to Keith to get into the more details of some of the sources of ROI and the things he wants to talk around the cost of doing nothing. Keith, let me hand this over to you to get into some more of the technical aspects of this.
Thanks, Andre. Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to attend this webinar. Before I jump into the ROI, I want to step back for a minute. There are three main components to a network visibility solution: network access points, a monitoring switch, also called a network packet broker, and then the actual monitoring them tools themselves, which are also called probes. And Andre talked about that a minute ago. A well-constructed visibility architecture will include all three of those components. I've supplied a simplified architecture here, but if you want more details, ICSIA has a white paper on our website called Creating a Visibility Architecture. This white paper talks about the visibility architectures, the different types available, and their uses. So Andre talked about monitoring tools earlier. As you can see, there are lots of different types with different uses. The ones shown in this chart from EMA are typical, and I'm sure you're familiar with most of them, like sniffers, performance monitors, IPSs, and IDSs. The amount of tools in your network will depend upon what you're trying to monitor, and this chart just serves as a good level set for the different types that are out there. As far as ROI is concerned, there are three primary sources of value: cost reductions, cost avoidance, and revenue generation. Network visibility can demonstrate value in all three areas, but especially in the cost reduction and cost avoidance areas. I'll show some examples of this in the next couple slides. One key note here is that as I move forward and I'm talking about ROI, I'm going to focus most of my ROI comments on the network packet broker and the return on that particular investment. The monitoring tools themselves also have an ROI, but the ROI can get very specific depending upon the tool purpose, location of the tool, the network, and how much the tool is used. So keep that in mind if you're doing an ROI analysis, or total ROI analysis. There's the packet broker, but then also the monitoring tools. So this slide provides a quick summary of possible cost reductions, and the actual cost reductions depend upon how the NPB is actually used. As you can see, though, there are several good potential examples of monitoring switch benefits here. Not all of these may apply to you. It just depends, again, how you're using the network packet broker in your network. One example, though, is that change board approvals to add remove equipment from the live production network can be reduced if not eliminated. By its nature, once the NPB is inserted into the network, you don't need as many change board approvals, if any, to add new monitoring tools to the network. This causes less disruptions to the network, obviously. Even if you add or remove monitoring tools from the network, they should be downstream from the monitoring switch there, so they won't have any effect on or any impact on network outage or anything that would require a change board approval. From an ROI perspective, this means that the mean time to resolution is reduced because you don't have to wait for an appropriate maintenance window to connect the monitoring tools. You don't have to spend time tracking down individuals to get approvals. Basically, you can begin the debugging process immediately because you can connect the monitoring tool or tools right away. They're essentially hitless. This can eliminate the productivity losses that were previously required to gather approvals. For some of ICSIA's customers, this has cost them several hours of time, if not actually days, to get those approvals. The second example is that network problem debugging time can be reduced. A faster MTTR is achieved by distributing multiple copies of the same information to multiple debug tools. So relevant packet captures can be created at the time of incident for faster resolution by your Tier 2 or Tier 3 technicians and engineers. For example, what used to take one of ICSIA's customers a week was reduced to an hour after they installed an NPB. Many of our other customers have seen a mean time to repair reduction by up to 60%. Andre was talking about 90% before, so again, it does depend upon the use and how much or how little you use these network packet brokers. Third potential cost-cutting possibility includes the elimination of adding additional monitoring tools. So essentially, the NPB provides aggregation that can be used to maximize the utility of existing monitoring tools, so you monitor more links with less tools. This can reduce additional tool costs as well as the associated maintenance costs. And this also typically results in big savings for Ixia's customers. Besides CapEx reduction or elimination for monitoring tools, there's also the cost reduction or elimination for tap ports as well. With an MPB, there's less need for additional tap ports, because these connections are basically built into the NPB, so you can connect up the monitoring tools in maybe a tool farm configuration or whatever that connects directly to the NPB, and then once you need to access any of the tools, they're live, and you just divert the appropriate packets over to the appropriate tool, and you can start monitoring those packet streams. Finally, you may be able to save money by removing clutter as well. Deduplication reduces unnecessary packets to save on storage costs and increases monitoring tool processing time and efficiency. While some monitoring tools have built-in deduplication capabilities, this comes at the cost of reducing CPU efficiency of the monitoring tool, because the monitoring tool has to not only perform its specified function but also the deduplication, and there's only so much processor capability. So an MPB will help you improve the efficiency of the monitoring tool by letting it do what it does best. Besides cost elimination, cost avoidance also offers ROI benefits. One example is by preserving your investment in current tools. The load balancing feature of an MPB allows you to segment packets to specific monitoring tools which might have lower data rates than the line rate. So essentially this allows you to continue to use maybe 1 gig E tools and a 10 gig or 40 gig E network that you've just upgraded the line speed to. But because you're able to continue using your 1 gig tools, you don't have to buy new equipment for the higher network speeds. Now you probably will down the road, but what this can do is, again, it avoids a cost for you. It doesn't eliminate it maybe, but it definitely avoids it, so that maybe for the next budget cycle, you can delay your purchase until then. Maybe that's 6 months down the road, maybe that's a year. Second benefit could be to use an MPB to remove unnecessary or sensitive data. The packet slicing feature of a typical MPB allows only relevant data to be sent to monitoring tools. This speeds up processing time and eliminates some compliance issues. For instance, credit card information should not be passed on to monitoring tools in a typical PCI compliant environment. An NPB allows you to remove that credit card information and stay PCI compliant. NPBs can also be coupled with security tools and out-of-band or inline configurations to bolster your security initiatives. Security benefits can include the automation of packet captures, rigorous filtering mechanisms, or even diversion of intruders to honeypots. The real question is how much will a public security breach cost you in terms of lost intellectual property and reputation. Automation itself is a large category of potential benefits as well, and Andre talked about that earlier, but it improves integration to other network equipment to save or avoid costs, and it has significant ROI impacts in the ability to achieve near real-time responses for monitoring functions so that you can react to anomalies and problems as fast as possible. Automation can also be used to set up intelligent traffic routing of data and monitoring functions at the same time that a user or service is created. This allows you to spin up monitoring functions as they are needed with minimal delays in user involvement. And then a properly integrated NPB can also contribute to potential revenue. While this argument isn't as strong as the cost savings argument, it is real, especially if the business is based upon e-commerce. The first example is the ability to maximize e-commerce uptime. As discussed previously, an NPB can be used to help fix network outages and improve MTTR. This translates to maximum e-commerce revenue generation by fixing network problems as fast as possible and using monitoring tools to proactively scan your network for problems before they result in outages. If the MTTR can be reduced, which could be up to 60% or more, as we said earlier, then multiply that reduction by the average length of time of an outage by your cost per minute for an outage to figure out its contribution. A second benefit is to maximize application performance. So customers for web services and other service offerings will abandon your website if delays are too long due to inefficiencies and network performance issues. One thing to keep in mind is that there is an alternative to making an NPB purchase, and certain types of people believe that the best course of action is to always delay expenditures as long as possible. They believe the policy saves them time or saves them money in the long run because they don't have to actually spend any hard cash. I don't believe this is true. There is always a cost to inaction, and so there is a cost to doing nothing as well. I've listed some of those costs here. Most of these are fairly self-explanatory, like the reduced productivity and higher problem resolution costs. An NPB can automate the connection of monitoring tools and allows you to quickly access the portion of your network you need to, especially if you're remote, and will save time and money as we discussed before. A lack of these capabilities means that you will keep implementing slower manual processes. Lack of agility means that the business is not as quick to respond to changes in executive direction. This is more of a senior management concern, but I put it in here. Lack of coverage. Usually you don't have enough money to buy tools for every network segment, so some parts of your network will not have coverage. This means you have to physically move the equipment around on a crash cart or something to get the tools where they need to be, which is obviously labor-intensive and slow. Higher CapEx monitoring tools are usually more expensive than monitoring switches. An NPB allows you to share tools better and saves the cost of buying more tools, especially as the cost for higher data rate tools like 40 gig Ethernet become very expensive. So saving the cost in NPB often results in the purchase of more expensive monitoring tools and probes. The net is actually higher cost, not lower cost. And so with that, I'll wrap this up a little bit. Basically on this slide and the next two slides, I wanted to reorganize the savings we saw earlier in a different format. One of the questions or comments that you may have is, what are the hard savings? Some people who have done ROI analysis before for other products and services in the marketplace have made substantial claims of ROI savings, which are primarily based upon productivity benefits. Productivity benefits are often a hard concept for decision makers to believe because they can be subjective and overinflated. As an example, if feature A saves 30 minutes of time for an employee, will the employee actually use that 30 minutes of time doing more work, or spend it on a cigarette break, or spend more time talking to others at the water cooler? This can definitely be a sore spot for some decision makers who may have felt duped by other salespeople whose main value proposition was based upon those productivity savings. In the analysis presented so far, you can see that our ROI analysis focuses mainly on hard savings, i.e. the actual lack of spending real money on the part of the customer. The couple areas of soft savings are related to time spent waiting on change board approvals and productivity around faster debugging time. Both of these are something that you can quantify on your own based upon your own data for downtime, MTTR, so forth, so you have full control over those values. In addition, there is another area of soft savings to customers that deploy NPBs. These three areas are summarized on this slide. IT service penalty hits data center automation and regulatory compliance. Andre talked about several of these earlier. While a good case could be built to financially justify these elements, nothing is included within the analysis presented so far. However, you should be aware of these additional sources of value for an NPB because they may or may not be something you want to take advantage of. It just depends as to any of these happen to be pain points for you. Regulatory compliance can especially be of concern to anyone in IT concerned with compliance practices. This topic is also a standard concern for the CFO and sometimes the CIO as well. This is another key slide. While we can create a very realistic ROI, you must implement the monitoring tool installation and programming correctly. Ixia products all have a GUI interface which help our customers realize a faster configuration and filter creation process than our competitors. The time savings are enormous over command line interfaces, but our GUI is especially easy and intuitive to use. Whatever equipment you buy, make sure this concern is addressed, or you'll spend a lot of time on programming that will eat away at the projected ROI savings. And then when performing an ROI analysis, use a proper tool that gives you clear, convenient results. Here's some examples of output from a tool that Ixia has. In the top right corner, we have the basic ROI chart that gives you the ROI percentage, payback period, and present value of the purchase. The lower right chart gives you the cash flow over 3 years, and the left side gives you a couple of pie charts of the ROI breakdown by type of benefit and cost. While our tool and others out there have more bells and whistles, these are the key charts to help you analyze and justify a network packet broker purchase.
Great. Thank you both, Andre and Keith. Really appreciate it. There's some great information in there about ROI for your network visibility. Want to remind everybody, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A widget at the bottom and go ahead and submit those. We've got a couple to run through. If we run out of time, or if your question needs a kind of a more complete answer than we can do here on the webinar, we'll be sure to email you after the fact. So first question up, Andre, this actually might be a good one for you to start with, and Keith can jump in as well, is what ROI or statement seems to work best to sell this into an executive team? How are people being able to justify this with their exec team?
Well, a lot of conversations, and what I end up finding is that the executive team, like I mentioned before, is so in tune with the business, and data is coming back and showing the business right now, their top 5 priorities are generating new revenue, improving customer experience, getting new customers out there, and changing their business model. And then cost is like number 6 on the list, probably surprising to a lot of people. So what I end up finding is that teams who know their business, and so if it's whatever it's manufacturing or it's healthcare, can present to their teams how monitoring can enhance that business itself, and actually point to a specific instance of creating a new revenue stream for the business, or changing their customer experience of the business. It gets the ears of that side, and typically you'll see that being put in the budgets because there is a huge push to enhance the business around that, and so it takes a little bit more work. You just don't fall back onto a typical IT thing. It's really understanding how the network affects the business, and so if you can present something that changes the business and creates new revenue streams or customers, I can guarantee you it will be on the net, will be part of that budget cycle. Keith, I don't know if you have any perspective as well.
For me, it depends upon what the executive is looking for. So like I'd mentioned before, if compliance is one of their hot buttons, then that's definitely something you can play up there. Like you said, cost is sometimes an issue, but usually not so much at that level. It's about, like I said, compliance, or if there's some hot initiative like data center automation, or trying to maximize network uptime for e-commerce or something like that.
Yeah, I would say, as executives that are dealing with IT, that's exactly right. So typically, for the networking team to, go out and purchase monitoring types of tools and solutions out there, if they can do it in a sense of so it gives other teams visibility, gives other teams information, by far exactly, because that's one of the biggest gripes I hear from other teams is the network is like a black hole. It's this magical thing that they don't understand what's going on and what's happening. A lot of times it's just that just give them some visibility. They don't want to control it. They don't want to do other things. But, so if it's around creating enhancing the data center, moving it to much more of a cloud type of infrastructure, things like that, yep, it is. Those are other areas that, when you're talking to other technology teams or selling to executives that talk to, work with executive technology teams, exactly right is thinking about how can I provide more information for other teams is another angle that typically works well with in the enterprise space.
Okay. Fantastic. Next up, so what are the 2 most important sources that you consider for ROI? And kind of along the same lines, we also had a question come in about ROIs for mobile and the telco industry, since those networks can be generally a little bit more complex. What do you guys have to say about that?
So I'll jump in and start on that one. So what we've been seeing from our customers is a faster MTTR. That's pretty much number 1. We've documented cases where customers have cut the mean time to repair by 60% or more. And so that's definitely been one that has just been an easy one to pick out and delivers hard savings for them. A second one that delivers a lot of hard savings is tap and monitoring tool cost avoidance. So when an NPV is connected to the network, you can divert the necessary traffic to a pool of tools rather than having to buy more tools that connect directly up to the different taps. And especially with the cost of some of these tools, especially the specialized tools, that can be $100,000, $200,000 a pop. That can be some real hard savings for them, and we've definitely had customers that have seen that savings there. Andre?
Yeah, I would echo those two are probably my top two. I would, even carry off the tap scenario of that typically, putting in taps and even spanning ports requires a reconfiguration of a switch, so that's downtime, or that's, time if I need to reconfigure things and send traffic down a different area to make sure I have that availability. So, the expense of always, throwing in more pieces of equipment is a headache with a lot of organizations. The thing I would probably add on is probably add third to, which you said two sources, but I'm going to add a third one, is a lot of times WAN utilization, really seeing what you need and why you need more, and really understanding the traffic across there, because here's the reality of it is there's so much more happening, much more service and applications being sent across that, not to like a branch office, but we think about what's occurring, at gas stations and the fact that there's food services in there, and in the environments of those going on there, or retail, in the way that they're changing that environment. And so a lot of new application services are being crossed over that network, video and voice and customer intimacy kinds of scenarios, that you really want to make sure that WAN link is being used the best possible. And the only way we can know that happen is really to have understanding of the traffic that's traversing it. So that I'm going to add a third one on to the two sources of ROI.
Great. Had another question come in from somebody who they need to know if they can see, with kind of this ROI, if they can see how many duplicates there are in the network. So getting kind of a broader picture of the network and what they have.
Let me start off on this one. I would say yes. When I do network assessments, I find that people there's way too many tools, and there's legacy tools, and the amount of duplication is incredible. One of the network assessments I did for a large pharma company, honestly, they had over 25 monitoring tools, and the network team didn't know that, because what happened was, and as I kind of mentioned earlier in my presentation, that their other teams were frustrated as a networking team providing the lack of information they weren't getting from. So they went off and bought their own tools. Now, it's not just having things everywhere, but here's the issue is the way the tools present information to each of the teams will be different, and so you're still having this communication issue between the teams because you're looking at different data. And so, monitoring and going out there and understanding, what's occurring on your infrastructure and having, a tool set that's consistent you're working from, that going out there and seeing these things and getting rid of duplication is highly important. And this is why, monitoring allows you to see a lot of the duplication, not just the monitoring tools, but equipment that exists on the network.
Yeah, and then from an ICSI point of view, that's why we had written that white paper on visibility architectures, because one thing is to step back, do an audit of what you have in your network, and then proactively plan out what you have now, where you're going, and how you're going to get there. And you may find out that there are duplicate pieces of monitoring tools and taps and stuff out there that you can reuse to architect a better network that's more cohesive and allows you to be more efficient, but also more proactive than you've been in the past. So yeah, we've seen the same thing.
Okay, fantastic. So to go along with that, talking about the visibility architecture, if we had a question of if they wanted to actually build out a visibility architecture, where do you start?
First thing I would say is...
Go ahead, Keith. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'll let you jump in a minute. I was just going to say the first thing I would do is step back and do an audit. What do you have? And then the second thing is, where do you want to go? What are you planning? How are you going to get there? And then, like I said before, with my very simplistic, and our white paper goes into more detail, but very simplistically, you've got to have some sort of access points. You've got to have your monitoring tools that are going to align with your needs of whatever you wanted to monitor. So in between, if you don't have a network packet broker, you're going to need to add one or more to actually be able to efficiently divert the flows where they need to go to the right tool at the right time. But again, you also then, as an IT person, need to figure out what are your high-level objectives. Do you have data center automation needs? Do you have needs where you want to start, if you can, prototype some of your customers, especially if you're like a service provider or something? You want to look at information and do correlation around data information. Well, you need to divert the different information to the proper tools so you can do analysis, and then it can go on from there and do more business intelligence and reporting. Andre, you want to add to that?
No, well, I am going to, but it took the wind out of my sails. I'm surprised. We didn't even talk about a lot of this stuff, and we're in complete agreement. I would say auditing was typically my number one when I talk to organizations that call in or when I'm doing network assessments. And number two, it could be number one. Here's the number two thing of that is going out and having conversations with the different teams out there. So the network team going out and having conversations of what's important to that team. What information do they need? Because you can put that number one or number two to the audit, because you'll end up in finding the audit, as I mentioned before, that probably more than likely than not, people have gone out, other teams have gone out and bought their own stinking tools because they didn't get what they needed. And so having that conversation is, what does that team need, will help you understand why the tool, when you did the audit, why the tool exists, or when you do the audit afterwards, however you want to approach it. But it's definitely two things going on there, auditing and having that conversation to each of the teams. And I'm not saying just have a conversation with the data center team, server or storage team. You need to go out and have a conversation with each line of the business and departments, because what happens at a manufacturing site versus within the campus area of the manufacturer. And I'll take example. Let's just say like a large auto manufacturer. What happens at their manufacturing versus their site versus what happens in Detroit in the C-suite are going to be totally different things of what goes on and what their expectations of the network and what the services that go on there. I'll give you a perfect example. I deal with a food manufacturer that at their manufacturing site, they need to have basically a 5 nines wireless connection. Why? Because they do just-in-time type of manufacturing, and when the cereal boxes come off that line and get palletized, they get put right on the truck so they don't have to hold any inventory cost. Well, there's an application that runs to the forklift that's very latency sensitive, and for some reason they have a disconnect at all, there's an issue with the connection to that forklift, getting that information to the forklift. What happens is that the manufacturing line shuts down for a minute or two. Well, what they have to do is actually shut it down for 6 hours, because that minute or two is a health issue. They got to superheat the facility and kill all the germs within that processing equipment and then bring it back online. So monitoring in that instance for that area is dramatically, business-related important versus having a latency-sensitive monitoring back at the corporate headquarters may not be important. So it's such an important issue, not just to audit, but have conversations with the lines of business units and departments on what's important to them, as well as other technology teams. That's my piece to the auditing.
Okay, great. I think we have one last question here, and it's a good one to wrap up on. So how do I get a free ROI analysis? Who do I call? What do I do? Okay,
so basically you can call Ixia. Our phone number is there, 877-367-4942, or go to Ixia, www.ixiacom.com. We can hook you up with a sales team member that will give you a free ROI analysis. So the screenshots you saw actually come from our tool. There's quite a list of other tables and charts that are in the tool, but we can literally sit down with you, gather your information, put it into the tool, and it will give an ROI output that's tailored to your specific organization and your needs and where you want to go.
Okay. Fabulous. Well, thank you, Andre, Keith. Thank you, everybody who attended today's webinar on the real ROI for network visibility. We appreciate your time, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.